And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I'm your host, Demo, and this is 10 cards you should be putting in your Commander decks, episode 29. And we are starting out this week with Dingus Staff, 4 mana artifact. Whenever a creature dies, Dingus Staff deals 2 damage to that creature's controller. That's it. You know, I really don't like the fact that they have stopped making cards like this. You know, and I mean, maybe there are some, but just the cards that have this universal effect that affect everybody, but then you build your deck around it, I just think are really great cards, especially in the Commander format. And they just really don't make cards like this anymore. And I wish they still would. This is just a great card in any deck where you are trying to kill your opponent's creatures. You know, I talked about Deathmatch and Death Pits of Wrath in my last 10 cards video, which is in a creature hating theme. So this would be a great card in a deck like that. I just did a deck doctor for one of my patrons, and he had a Pharika deck where he's giving his opponent's creatures by exiling creature cards from their graveyard, right? So he's giving them the snake tokens, which is another interesting take on that deck. And this is in that deck because he's going to give them the snake tokens and then have those snake tokens die. They take damage from it. So there's just a lot of strategies that you can put this card in. I think it's a great inclusion in a lot of decks. Coming in at number 2, Dimir Doppelganger, 1 a blue and a black. Shapeshifter 0/2, and you can pay 1 blue and a black, exile target creature card from a graveyard. Dimir Doppelganger becomes a copy of that card, except it has this ability. It's just a really fantastic sort of clone effect in a Commander game. Again, because you have so many graveyards to choose from, you can choose your own. Sure, this is always great in a deck where you can choose your own. I had put this in my Chromium deck where I'm throwing lots of big nasty creatures like Avacyn's and Elishnorns in my graveyard that then I can just pay 3 mana and this becomes a copy of it. It's just a cheap way, almost a little bit of a recursion theme there, where I can pitch a huge creature in my graveyard and then for 3 mana this becomes a copy of it. It's also graveyard hate, which I really, really like, right? You're exiling that creature card from a graveyard. So it's a great way to hate on your opponent's graveyard, and really fantastic in a milling strategy. Most mill decks are blue and black. So in a milling strategy, now I can put this in play, and rather than my opponent taking advantage of the fact that he has big creatures in his graveyard to reanimate, I can exile them so that they can't, and then of course I get that effect as well. Coming in at number 3, Diplomatic Immunity, 1 and a blue enchantment aura. And this card doesn't seem like much on its face, but it is very unique in what it's doing. This is why I'm giving it a mention. It has Shroud, okay? So this actual card, Diplomatic Immunity, has Shroud itself and then gives enchanted creature Shroud as well, right? So again, it's just a really great way, like I mentioned with Steely Resolve and so many of these other cards, to just keep your hands off my commander, because I'm going to put this on my commander. My commander can't get touched. And if you don't want to equip your commander or put any other auras on your commander, it's fantastic that way. You just don't want anyone touching it. And then the enchantment itself also has Shroud. So someone can't just Krosan Grip your Diplomatic Immunity, right? The only way to get that Diplomatic Immunity off your commander or whatever creature you have it on is to, you know, Bane of Progress or maybe a Cyclonic Rift, some sort of board wipe effect that's going to get rid of it. So it's just a really great card for protecting your commander. If you're playing a Zur the Enchanter deck, and I haven't mentioned a card that goes in a Zur deck in a while, I've only mentioned about 12 of them already, so it's been a while since I mentioned one. This is one that if you're playing the sort of Voltron strategy of Zur, this is a great one to go get. It's one of the first ones that people get, because when you're using Zur's ability, you know, auras can be a little confusing. When you cast them, they're targeting, right? When they're on the stack, they target the creature that you're enchanting. But when you use an ability like Zur, where it's just entering the battlefield, it's not actually targeting. So you can go get this with your Zur, put it on your Zur, and then the next turn you can go get another enchantment aura with your Zur and put it on your Zur, and it's not actually targeting, so it gets around the Shroud, so it's a great fit there as well. Just a great card if you want to be protecting any of your creatures and you don't want your opponent touching them. Coming in at number 4, Dire Undercurrents, 3 and 2 hybrid Dimir mana, so a blue and a black, so 5 mana total. Enchantment: whenever a blue creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may have target player draw a card. Whenever a black creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may have target player discard a card. I can't believe I've never seen this in a Commander game. I don't think I ever have. I had it in my Rona deck because my Rona deck was a blink deck. And every time I'm blinking those creatures, like say I blink my Rona, for example, Rona is both blue and black. So both of these are going to trigger. My Rona comes into play. And of course, I'm going to choose myself to draw the card. So I get to draw a card and I get to choose an opponent who has to discard a card. This is just a card that I think if you're in any Dimir deck that has a fair amount of creatures can be really good though. You know, if you think about it, it's kind of weird in that it's like a Guardian project. If you just think about the blue creature entering the battlefield, you get to draw a card. Like basically every time I have a creature enter the battlefield, I get to draw a card. That's an effect you do not see in these kinds of colors typically. That's a very green effect usually. And then the added bonus of if a black creature enters the battlefield, target player discards a card. This can be tokens, right? It doesn't have to be an actual creature. It can be a token creature. If you have an effect that a whole bunch of black tokens all of a sudden enter the battlefield, like Carrion, another card I've mentioned in my 10 cards video, sacrifice a creature, have 10 of those 0/1 tokens enter the battlefield. Now I can get all of my opponents to discard 10 cards total amongst them. That seems pretty good. Like this seems like a really good card. I suppose it's a 5-mana card that doesn't impact the board right away, but to me, I just think the value here, it's a great value engine of I'm drawing cards and I'm getting my opponents to discard. Coming in at number 5 this time, and we're really in a lot of Dimir cards for whatever reason. You know, I did a whole bunch of black enchantments in the last few videos, and now we're into the Dimir cards here. Disciple of Deceit, blue and a black, human rogue 1/3, has inspired, which means whenever Disciple of Deceit becomes untapped, you may discard a non-land card. If you do, search your library for a card with the same mana value as that card, reveal it, and put it in your hand. So it's just a really neat little sort of tutor effect. In any deck where you want to be discarding anyway, it's really fantastic if you're in a cycling theme or some sort of discard theme, maybe even if you just want to be chucking stuff into your graveyard. It's basically transmute, right? Basically what Disciple of Deceit does is it does transmute, where you're discarding something of a certain mana value and then you're going to go get that same mana value out of your library and put it into your hand. That's what it's doing, and maybe that's why I like this card so much. I think it can definitely go in some decks. It's got to become tapped so you can attack with it. It has a 3 toughness, so maybe it's going to be okay there. Then on your untap step, when it untaps, then you get to use that ability. Really great fit in a Phoenix deck. You know, in a Phoenix deck where you can be tapping all your creatures and you don't have to worry about attacking. Now I can tap it. When it untaps, I get to go tutor for something. So I think that's a fantastic fit in that deck as well. Just a great tutor option. You know, sometimes people are looking for a sort of budget tutor option for their deck. So this is an option for you if you're looking for that. Coming in at number 6, Draco Plasm. And I'm so glad that I'm mentioning this card. This is one of those cards that I cracked open in packs when I first started playing Magic, and it just really blew me away. Because first of all, those gold bordered cards, you know, they were few and far between back then. And so when you crack one open in a pack, it really grabbed you. And also the art was really cool looking. It was just such a unique card, and I think it deserves a mention for that reason. It is blue and a red, so an is it shapeshifter, and it's an 0/0. Has flying. As Dracoplasm enters the battlefield, sacrifice any number of creatures. Dracoplasm's power becomes the total power of those creatures, and its toughness becomes their total toughness. And it has that pumpable dragon effect of pay 1 red, and it gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Like, it's only 2 mana, okay? So where I really like this card, and I'm sure a lot of people can think of a lot of different ways to use this card, but where I particularly like it is if you are in any theme where you have a creature that maybe has a drawback. So it has a high power and toughness, but also has a big drawback. Right? So basically what's going to happen is I'm going to sacrifice that creature. Whatever drawback that creature has is now gone, and I've added flying and pumpable onto it, which I think is fantastic. So for example, I think it's a great fit in a Ruhan of the Formori deck, right? 1 blue and a red and a white giant warrior. At the beginning of combat on your turn, choose an opponent at random, and Ruhan attacks that player, this combative able. That's a drawback for me. I know some people might like that in their deck. You know, a 7/7 4-mana creature is really, really good, but it has that drawback where you have to attack, and you have to attack a random opponent. If a Dracoplasm is in your deck, now you can just play the Dracoplasm, sacrifice your commander. Now you have a 7/7 flying pumpable creature, controller for only 2 mana that can attack whenever you feel like it, right? And you're probably in a Voltron strategy in a Ruhan deck already, so now you can also throw all that Voltron equipment on top of your draco plasm as well. That's sort of the thinking I have for this card. It's just a really unique, interesting card, especially in Izzet colors. You don't see stuff like that in Izzet colors very often, and I think it could definitely see some more play. Coming in at number 7, Dragon Lair Spider, and this is one that definitely could have gone on my list that I did recently of 10 Commander staples I don't see anymore. 2 red, green Spider. 5/6, of course, has reach, and whenever an opponent casts a spell, create a 1/1 green insect creature token. So just used to be a card that you see all the time in the format, and I'm giving it a mention on this list because, again, it's another one of those cards that was all over the place, and now I never see it anymore. It's just a really great value card. Yes, it is 6 mana. 5/6 reach is pretty good, but man, again, it's just like I talked about with cards like Progenitor Mimic, where right away, it's a 6 mana card that right out of the gate, you don't get a ton of value, but if it sticks, it just becomes so good. Like whenever an opponent casts a spell, you get a token. That's really, really good. Where do you specifically put this? I think you could put it in any deck just because it's a great value card. A spider themed deck maybe, or an insect themed deck maybe. Typically you don't do that in red and green though. If this was a black-green card, it definitely could see a lot more play in decks like that. If you're in a sacrifice theme, it's also fantastic. So again, for that reason, you don't see sacrifice themes in red and green as much. Maybe a Jund deck, there's a lot of sacrificing going on, so it definitely would fit there. You just have tons of fodder for sacrificing. But even in, say, like just a Grumgully deck, I think it's a fantastic fit, right? Each other non-human creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on. So now those tokens you're getting, they're insects. Obviously, they're not humans, so they're going to be 2/2s. So I think it's a fantastic fit there. I really think it could go in a lot of decks. Just a card that I used to see all the time that I never see anymore. Coming in at number 8, and this is a wacky, crazy one. This is a really, really powerful card. Dream Halls, 3 blue enchantment. And buckle up for this text. Rather than pay the mana cost for a spell, its controller may discard a card that shares a color with that spell. So just a crazy busted card back in the day. It still is a very, very powerful effect, right? So just to clarify how this works, I discard my opt and I cast my Jin Cataxis for free. I just discard any card as the casting cost, right? As to pay the casting cost for that spell. It just has to share a color with it. It's not going to work with colorless stuff because they don't share any colors, because they don't have any colors. It's got to be a colored card in order for this to work. Also doesn't pay additional costs. So commander tax, for example, any additional cost like sacrificing stuff, you'll have to pay because that's as an additional cost. But obviously this is a ridiculously powerful effect that you could do a lot of ridiculously powerful things with, but it works for your opponents as well, right? That's where this gets really, really crazy in a commander game. Just like Allurin. Allurin is another card that really, really powerful effect, but because your opponents can use it too, you really got to be careful when you play cards like that. Dream Halls can get out of hand really fast. You really have to sort of take advantage of it more so than your opponents, right? If you're going to put this in your deck, you have to guarantee you're taking more advantage of it than your opponents are. Incredibly powerful effect that no other card in the game that does this, so I definitely got to give it a mention. Coming in at number 9, Dreamtides, 2 blue enchantment, and man, it really is the Dimir version of 10 cards video. Almost every card in this list is blue or black. So 4 mana enchantment, and creatures don't untap during their controller's untap step. I haven't really mentioned a stacks card in a while, so I think I'm about due for one. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player may choose any number of tapped non-green creatures they control and pay 2 for each creature chosen this way if that player does untap those creatures. So basically what this is saying is creatures aren't going to untap during their controller's untap step. None of them are. Yours, nobody's. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player can pay 2 mana for each creature they want to untap. All right. So if you have one creature and you want to untap it, you can pay 2 and it'll untap. Has to be non-green though. Okay. You don't want to put this in your Simic deck. You want to put this in a deck where you don't have any green creatures because green creatures just aren't going to untap at all, right? That second part at the beginning of the upkeep is only applies to non-green creatures. So this really hoses a green deck. Really going to slow the game down. I don't know if I necessarily call this a stacks piece, more of a tax piece, right? To me, this is more taxing than it is is staxing, if that makes any sense. I guess it would be more stacks against the green deck and more tax against everybody else, right? Because you have to pay 2 to untap your creatures. So it's going to be great against any green deck, and it's going to be great in any deck where you just don't have a lot of creatures, right? If you don't have a lot of creatures, maybe you're in an enchantment tribal deck, like an Estra deck, I think this would be a great fit because you don't have a lot of creatures in that deck, right? You just have a lot of enchantments, for which this is also one. And coming in at number 10 today and closing out the blue and black cards for this list is Dreams of the Dead. 3 and a blue enchantment. And again, has a very unique, very unusual ability. Pay 1 and a blue. Return target white or black creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. That creature gains cumulative upkeep 2. If that creature would leave the battlefield, exile it instead of putting it anywhere else. So, lot to talk about here. I put this in my Urtai the Corrupted deck, that I did on my Underwhelming Commanders video, because I thought it was a fantastic fit there, because you are sacrificing a lot of creatures that you can then get back, right? And when you get them back, then you can sacrifice them again to your Urtai. So it's just a great way to ensure you have creatures to sacrifice to your Urtai. The important thing of note here, though, is this is obviously a blue card, so you can play this in any blue deck. However, if you play this in a mono blue deck, it's going to be useless to you, because you can only return white or black creatures from your graveyard to the battlefield. That's one of the things that makes this a very unique and weird card. So for me, I'm playing this in an Esper deck, right? I want to take maximum advantage of this. You can play this in a Zorius deck. You can play this in a Dimir deck if you want to. I think in order to get maximum advantage out of it, I want to play this in an Esper deck. So any of my creatures that are black or white, I can get out of my graveyard. Obviously, if a card is both blue and white, like a Reflector Mage, for example, that's white so I can get it. It just has to be one or other of those colors. If you're in an Esper ETB strategy, it's fantastic because I have that Reflector Mage and I use its ability. It dies. Now I can get it back from the graveyard. I don't care that it has cumulative upkeep because I just want that bounce effect out of it. Maybe I have an Angel of Despair in my graveyard. I can return that to the battlefield for only 2 mana and destroy a permanent. And then again, the cumulative upkeep, I can pay it or not. If I don't, it gets exiled. The other reason why I think it works in a blink strategy is now I can respond to, just like you do with Unearth. For those people who don't know, this is basically the same as Unearth, where I'm getting it out of my graveyard, and if it's going to leave the battlefield, I have to exile it instead. But if you are already exiling it, then it's not going to replace itself, right? So if I blink something, if I'm casting an Ephemerate, for example, on that creature that I return from the graveyard, it's already getting exiled. So you don't need to exile it instead because it's already getting exiled. So now I can return that Angel of Despair to the battlefield with Dreams of the Dead. Then I can cast an Ephemerate on it. It's going to get exiled, and there's no replacement effect there because it's already being exiled, and then it's going to come back into play. And now I get to actually keep it, and there's no cumulative upkeep on it anymore because it's a new card, right? So just a very interesting card. If you just think about I pay 2 mana to return a creature from my graveyard to the battlefield, that's an incredibly powerful effect, right? You just have to make sure it's a white or black creature. So if you're in an Esper deck, that's going to be likely. And then the cumulative upkeep, maybe I pay it, maybe I don't, right? Maybe I don't care. Either way, I'm getting an extra effect out of that creature that's in my graveyard doing nothing for me anyway. So I really think this card can go in a lot more decks. But that is it for today. That is 10 more cards that you should be putting in your Commander decks. And if you're thinking of purchasing any of these cards, I do have a TCG player link in the description below. So give it a click if you want to help support the channel. But that is it, and thanks for tuning in.